This special meeting of the Judson Board of Trustees is hereby called to order at 6:37 p.m. I'm very pleased that you've taken time to join us this evening. As the Judson Board of Trustees, we are here to set goals and policies and oversee the management of the district. We are responsible for approving budgets, contracts, personnel appointments, and to listen to reports from the superintendent. We are not here to make administrative or management decisions pertaining to the daily operations of the district. This is the responsibility of the superintendent. In compliance with the State Government Code on Open Meetings, tonight's agenda has been appropriately posted. This is a meeting in public, not a meeting of the public. As our guest, you are welcome to observe and listen. These proceedings are being video and audio recorded and will become part of Judson's permanent legal record. In order that the tape adequately reflects these proceedings, please silence your mobile devices and refrain from talking while others are speaking. Since it is legally mandated that these proceedings are recorded accurately, I may have to ask for order periodically should I notice that disruptions are interfering with our recording capabilities. Once again, I extend to each of you a sincere welcome from the entire school board. Thank you for your interest in Judson ISD. We've established a quorum, and I will call roll. Ms. Rodriguez?
Present.
Ms. Pichal?
Present.
Mr. LaFoyle?
Present.
Ms. Kenoyer?
Present.
Mr. Macias?
Present.
And I'm Melinda Salinas, and we also have our superintendent, Dr.
Present.
Carl Montoya. Okay. I need my little,
Oh, Jesse.
We'll move on to item number 2, discussion consideration of action items. Thank you. Consider and take possible action regarding approving of the proposed budget for the 2018 fiscal school year. Do I have a motion?
Motion.
Second.
Motion, Mr. Macias, second, Ms. Pichal. Discussion. I'm trying to move it to the, oh. Okay, there we go. We're on discussion now. No one has any discussion?
You're not gonna get any from the start?
And again, members of the board, Mr. Elizondo and Nicole Dean are here to answer any questions or clarifications, so the floor is open for that.
Is it okay if I speak a little bit to it? Okay. So this particular agenda item, board members, is the one that we prepared in development of the budget for next school year, for the 15-18 fiscal year budget. It is the same document, which you have in front of you, the same document that we discussed last week on Thursday night. There were some recommendations or budget considerations that were shared at that meeting for the board to kind of think and see what y'all thought about and what y'all would like for us to try to address with those items. We are, just to reiterate, we are in a situation where this particular budget, as it's being presented on the revenue side for the general operating fund, which is on page 5 of your board book, shows that our total revenue is at $187.8 million. Our total expenditures are at $197 million. This particular document shows that our revenue versus expenditures are in excess of revenues $9.2 million, which would mean that if the board adopted this budget as is, it would entail that we were going to our fund balance for that $9.2 million. This budget, as far as personnel is concerned, which is our biggest portion of the budget, indicates that that we do have funds in there for the retention incentive that the board approved in November of 2016 to the tune of about $1.8 million. It also indicates about $2 million of new staff. The majority of that are staff for the Veterans Memorial High School. And then there are a few other amounts in there for some reclassifications and some new other positions that we shared with the board in detail at the last meeting, and that's also included in your board packet. We have made some recommendations. So, for instance, in the total revenue that we were talking about a minute ago, where it shows $187.7 to $8 million, with the board's approval, we would like to add a $4.4 million amount to that, and that is the one-time transfer that is going to be coming from the construction funds that was a loan for that Veterans Memorial High School. Once we do that, that will bring the revenue up to $192 million and change, 192, 197, 747. And of course, we made some recommendations on the expenditures, and I really would like to hear from the board as to what they would like for us to do there, because we can adjust that number and give you more of a true expenditure number once the board has shared with us what they would like for us to do in reference to changing the student-teacher ratios for next year, in reference to whether the board wants us to proceed with any kind of salary increase, or any other thoughts the board may have in reference to that.
Just a couple of comments. I obviously thought about this all weekend, as I'm sure my peers on the board did also. We've got some really important decisions to make. And I'll just speak for me personally. Right now, I'm not comfortable committing to a raise until our legislature finishes meeting and making decisions that may or may not impact us financially. And I'm also not in favor of rescinding our retention incentive at this time. I know that won't go into effect until December, and I believe September is the date that we make a decision on whether or not, if you were here in September, right, then you qualify for that. And I feel like we promised that to our employees. And if we're not able to give a raise, then at least we have that already built into the budget, correct? And I am in favor of considering the student-to-teacher ratio changes only if administration is going to ensure that it's going to happen at all levels. Especially at secondary level in particular, we shouldn't have professionals teaching ISS or teaching credit recovery, because that's typically done by a paraprofessional. And where those teachers, because everyone's a teacher, correct? We don't have any dual contracts anymore? Is that correct?
We do have some that are grandfathered in, but we don't
Got it.
offer new ones.
But the newer ones are not. So everyone's hired as an educator, as a teacher, and so it's really going to be important that we're fiscally responsible and that everyone is teaching and making an impact on kids academically. So those are my thoughts. My thought is to not rescind, to change the teacher ratio, and to not consider a raise at this time, but certainly to bring it back to the table, which could also consider rescinding the retention incentive later on also. But again, we have a lot of unknowns in my opinion.
Sorry, I was waiting to see when I was up. I have a question for Mr. Elizondo, if I may.
Yes, go ahead.
Mr. Elizondo, I'm not sure how to phrase my question, and maybe it's not even for you. I too am against rescinding the retention incentive. I don't want to be a board that makes promises and then goes back on them. But I also have major concerns that not giving some form of pay raise now or promise of pay raise now will have on our employees. I know that the employees are very demoralized because they did not get a raise last year. And to do that to them at the beginning of the year when they should be excited about coming back to classes and passing that enthusiasm on to their students gives me real heartburn. I know that there is a possibility that, according to Governor Abbott, that they may be requiring a $1,000 raise, and I have a couple of questions about that. Is that talking about to districts who already pay above state minimum, or would that apply to the state minimum?
You know, the way that the news release came out is that it was going to apply to everybody. They didn't say it was only for districts that were at the state minimum. So, and it's only for individuals on the teacher scale. So it would be teachers, nurses, librarians. I think counselors are included in that scale as well, but for sure teachers, nurses, and librarians. It's not an impact, it does not raise for everybody else, it's just for those groups of people. And I do believe that it is for all districts, not just the ones that are at the state minimum.
So then my other question might be more of a procedural one. Is there a way to formulate somehow a raise with language that states it would include anything that could be mandated by the legislature or during a special session?
Yes. However, when we discussed that with Paige Kyle at Wash Gallegos, she strongly advised against doing that. And her reason for that is that we never know how the legislators will craft the language in their raise. They could say something like, if the district has already granted a raise for this upcoming school year, this will be above and beyond that. And so that will trump anything that we would do locally. So that's why they were advising that it would be safer for the school districts to wait until after the legislative session to decide if they wanted to provide any raise once they knew exactly how the legislature had worded their, if they did grant a raise, how they had worded that particular language for that raise.
Okay, so then my next question would be, would we be able to give a token, say 1% raise now, with the idea that we could come back later in the year and increase that depending on what the legislature did? I know, make it hard for you.
The first part's easy,
Yeah.
is that could you grant a 1% salary increase? Yes, you could. Could you come back later and add to that? I think you could, especially if, for instance, your token or the raise, the 1% raise, let's say we equate it to $750, for example, for teachers. I'm not saying that's what it is, but, and then later the legislature came back and said, well, they're going to get $1,000. Then we would have to make sure that we were in compliance with the state new mandate, and so we'd have to increase it to the $1,000. Now they could say, again, kind of just going back to what I said a minute ago, right? If you already gave a raise, that's fine, but this is going to be above and beyond anything the district did. So then we would have to fund the 1% raise plus an additional, if it's $1,000 that they gave, an additional $1,000.
Thank you.
Thank you, I'm sorry. So, Mr. Elizondo, I have the same concerns everybody else does. But I did want to say one more thing. You know, I know that at the beginning of every year, there's always somewhat of a deficit that we have. But it levels out at some point in time, and I can't explain the leveling, but I do understand that it does happen. I guess my concern is, my focus has always been, I know that the teachers haven't had a raise, but my focus has always been on auxiliaries. And they've been without even longer than teachers have. And just as important as retaining our teachers is retaining our auxiliary staff. I don't see where we could give a 2 or a 3% without really putting ourselves in a significant bind. But I do recall last week that Mr. Macias asked about a 1 or a 1.5. And so tonight I was hoping that we might see what that figure would look like. Did you happen to?
No, I do not have those numbers.
Okay.
I could take a guess at it, but I would be cautious about doing that because I don't want to give you a number and we come back and decide that, no, it was too low.
Well, what I would support is, I definitely would support the retention incentive because, of course, it's what we promised. And it's too critical for us to say that we were going to do something and then rescind. So I would have to continue to support the retention incentive and some form of maybe a 1 or a 1.5%, I'm not sure, but I'm looking at across the board. My focus is still going to be on those auxiliary employees, and I'd like to see what we could do to help them. Thank you.
I share the same concerns that have been expressed, and definitely if we can't do a raise right now, feel like we should continue to have the retention incentive. I also have a question. So the numbers that are in our board book for last year's budget, is that showing where we ended the year, or was that the projected budget for last year?
That was a projected budget for last year.
Do we know where we're ending in comparison? Like, were we able to save any money, or did we end with the $4 million deficit that we had been projecting?
We will probably realize about half of that, about $2 million of a deficit from
Okay.
last year.
So there's a potential, like, worst case scenario, we're in the hole, it seems like about $5 million, but there's a potential to save money over time with actual expenditures during the school year.
And so I'm sorry, I'm asking for some clarification. When you're saying that we're in a hole approximately $5 million,
I'm adding the $4 million to the $9 million. Or am I doing that, is my math wrong
the
here?
4.4 million that we talked about a minute ago? Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, that's absolutely
Got
fine. And again, and we could, I don't have it with me, but I know Nicole does, the chart that we shared last week. This year, the 17-18 school year that we're working on, we are going to receive that $4.4 million. And we've talked about some other options, about the class ratios and everything. So for this year, the 17-18 school year, because of some of those things, we may be able to make the budget look okay, where it's like, okay, this is plausible, we can take it. But come the 18-19 school year, and that's why we spent a little bit of time talking about that at the last meeting, the 18-19 school year is going to look really, really bad. And let me give you for instance. Let's say that last year, the board would have decided to have given a raise at that point in time. And let's say the raise would have cost $4 million. So last year's budget, we would have adopted an $8 million deficit budget, for example. And a minute ago, I said we'll probably make up about $2 million of that. So then we would end up with a $6 million deficit for last year. So this school year, we would have started off with a $6 million deficit number that, truthfully, is very, very difficult to make up from. And so I'm just kind of showing had we done that. And going forward, depending on what happens with our students, if we continue to lose students like we did the past 2 years, it's going to definitely negatively impact us. And if the appraisals, and again, I don't have any control of it, so I have no idea, but if the appraisals of the properties in our district do not increase at least what they did this year, or actually they have to be greater than what they did this year, because as I mentioned at a budget meeting two meetings ago, that state funding is always based on a prior year assessed value. When it catches up, so like if next year the values stayed the same and we didn't have any kind of increase at all, the state brings it forward. Just for doing that, we were going to lose, and I think I mentioned the number was like $5 or $6 million just because of that. So you can imagine, and I hate, like I mentioned to the board, hey, my job would be easier if I can come up here and say, hey, there's plenty of money for everything, give raises, everybody's good, everybody's happy, let's go home. Unfortunately, we're not in that situation. And while I can tell you that, sure, for the 2017-18 school year, go ahead and do the raises, we'll make it through 17-18. Yeah, it'll work out because we have $4.4 million coming in, and if we take away $5 million for student-teacher ratios, we just found $9 million. But that only happens for one time.
Right.
And then next year, we're going to have to find more money somehow. And while we may, hopefully, if we increase in students a little bit, being optimistic, we may be able to pick up a little bit there. And if our values go up, then we will pick up a little bit there. But all in all, you may pick up, I don't know, $3 million, $3.5 million. You're still going to be in a really bad situation where you're going to have to rift positions, because you can do that for a couple of years. And I know the other day I used this word, and I don't like using it, but I'm going to use it again, is that after 2 or 3 years, if the direction is not corrected, then we'll end up in a bankrupt situation where we're going to have to be borrowing money to pay our bills and to keep, cash flowing to continue forward. And eventually, when that starts happening, the TA monitors school districts, and they call it circling the drain. And when you start circling that drain, they'll be here asking us, what are we doing? What's our plan to get out of the situation? And how do we get in the situation? So, like I said, I wish I could give you all better news, especially the new board members. You're thinking, oh my gosh, what did we step into? But we've had a lot of years where things are great. We were able to give employees good raises. I remember one time, it's been a while, We even did a 10% increase one time because things were doing that well. But unfortunately, that's not where we are today. And I know I'm trying to lead you in a direction as to which to vote, and that's not my intent. I'm trying to just offer the facts both ways, because ultimately, when the tough decision has to be made, the board is the one that's going to have to make a decision even next year, for the next year about, going through a RIF and cutting positions and deciding what positions we're going to cut or helping in that decision. Or the other thing too, I know some of the board members were asking about tax rate increases. And so that option's out there. That's another way to raise revenues. And so we just have to, as I mentioned before, really look at something like Mr. Macias said at the last meeting, look at our operation even more with more of a fine-tooth comb and determine, are there any other ways that we can do things smarter, cheaper, and accomplish similar or better goals or better results? Because when we start increasing the tax rate, if it is 13 pennies, it could be anywhere between 0 to 13 pennies, or 1 to 13 pennies more, then our taxpayers' pocketbooks start being affected. And while some of them can afford it and be okay, and they're going to be totally happy contributing and paying, there are others that, even though they would like to contribute to pay, they're going to say, gosh, I'm about to lose my house because I can't afford this new mortgage, the new escrow payments for my taxes. So we have that to kind of look at. But like I said, I'm just trying to present all the information so the board has as much as they can, and y'all can decide. And we're, like I said before, we're going to do whatever the board asks us to do.
I had one more quick question. Any savings that we have this year would go into the fund balance, or?
Yes.
Okay.
Anytime that we have a surplus budget, if you will, all those flow back into the fund balance. The only time when that changes is if during the school year, the board decides that or we bring to the board some kind of a budget amendment and the board says yes, then of course it comes out of that money as well.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. I wonder if, in terms of the legislative action that's being discussed potentially in the special session, if we need to talk to legal counsel to find out what Paige may have to say about that in particular. My guess would be that if that was passed, that there may be some legal maneuvering that the district can do, and I'm sure we wouldn't be alone, where we're actually probably taking the state of Texas to court for imposing such a strategy that would essentially really cripple our direction. So I can't see that there's no other potential recourse. I don't want to be held hostage to the what if. The reality is what's really happening, our teachers are leaving. We're not giving raises. We're not compensating them for their work. So that's a reality. This is still maybe, and then we have to confront that as aggressively as possible if that happens. And we probably can find ways to address that. But I haven't had a chance to talk to legal counsel or give them a call. So if that really does sway on our minds, I would say that we probably need to contact our legal counsel before we take action if we're motivated on that one action. So that's just me staying outside. We'll talk a little more about that, I'm sure, here today. Secondly, I hate being ignored. I do. I mean, I've asked for this information of a raise for our targeted turnover rate in absence of us being able to give a larger raise. So now I was told TASB would have that breakdown for me. It's not here, right? I mean, they told you? It is? Okay, so then, if that's the case, Ms. Pashal asked a question about if you have the data. What did I miss? I might have been writing my notes and not caught that completely. What was it that you asked, Ms. Pashal? You asked if they provided the information, and they said no.
Of the 1 or the 1.5%, if we were to.
Okay.
For everybody.
Okay.
So. That was my question.
Okay. And so I'm writing a lot of notes, so I forgot that. But good, because that's actually another potential strategy as well. That I'm not so mad about. So if TASB has sent the email, and I'm looking at my emails and looking at my notes, and all this is good, what was their answer? And I'll tell you why I'm not seeing it. I still want to see where our targeted turnover rate is, and that's still something I'm unclear of. Please tell me what that looks like right now. Sure. Well, the targeted turnover rate, I think both of those, you asked some questions this morning, and I think the superintendent forwarded those to all the board members around maybe 12 to 1 o'clock today with all the turnover rate information and which particular years we were seeing the greatest turnover in, And TASB also provided this morning for us the other things you wanted from year 5 to 15. Now, they had taken the first, I want to just be clear, they had taken what they thought was their first attempt at that when they were here at the last presentation, because they did that model, the third model that they did, and it was a very expensive model where they took all the way from the very beginning salary and increased everybody. And so after the conversation, the information you requested, today they prepared something that was a little different, only going down and starting at year 5 and going from year 5 on through the rest of the scale. Now, I will tell you that they also shared with us, and not necessarily actually with me, with Mr. Garcia, right, that Ms. Cadena from TASB said that they just wanted to caution us about that particular model because they were concerned about applying a model with such a large disparity from a 0 and 1 year teacher to a 5-year, where there's a $1,900 pay difference between a 0 teacher and a 1 year teacher and a 2 and a 4 all the way, and then at 5 you hit like $1,950 more. And so they aren't. That's not their philosophy as to how the scale should be developed. It should be closer than that, from what she shared. But regardless, that's what their opinion is, and you can definitely have your own opinion as to how the way you want that to work. But that model, when we put it together with the 3% model and saying, okay, we're going to replace the teacher scale that they proposed with the 3% model and put in this other model that, according with your request, Mr. Macias, that model, I think the increase went from like $5.x million to like $7.x million to implement that particular model. And then when we said, well, okay, well, let's try it with the 2% model, see what that looks like instead of doing the 3% model. And that model went from like 4-point-something% million to 6-point-something% million. So both, and they call that like model 4, if you will. So both the 3% model, which is 1, and the 2% model, which is 2, are actually cheaper than this other model, quite substantially. But there is a model out there as well, a TASB prepared, to show a more aggressive strategy towards retaining the teachers that are 5 years plus. And that model, combining with giving all the employees, if it's a 3% increase, it's like I said, a little over $7 million, $7.8 million, I think. And if it's the 2% model, then it's like $6-point-something million.
So if I were to ask you what years were we losing our teachers, what would you tell me? What's the highest year in terms of turnover? Is 0 to 3? Is it year 3? Is it 7? What years are we losing the most teachers?
It is typically between 5 and 20 years, Mr. Macias.
That's broad. 5 to 20, it's like saying 1 to 100. I mean, we can't narrow that a little bit closer.
Yes, sir. I
Okay,
have.
okay.
It's in the data that I sent you.
Please tell me what that is. What is the number? What are we looking for? And you have to remember, my Excel sheet's real tiny as I'm looking through it, so help me out a little bit. And I do see 5 to 20 and how many are on here, and this is great data, but I want to know where the highest turnover. Because if I look at this 0 to 20, I'm seeing year 0 being the highest number of exits. And so does that mean that's the highest area in which we have turnover? So I just explain so I'm clear, because I'm not perfect. I might misread something.
'16, 17 data, Mr. Macias. You'll see it's pretty stretched out, but there is a big cluster between 0 and 6 years. 0 years has 7, 2 years has 7, 3 years has 8, 4 years has 8, 5 has 6, and 6 has 12. So the big cluster there is from 0 to 5. But if you look at the 5 to 20 at the bottom, there are 61 resignations out of 111. But because we hire the most teachers between 0 to 5 years, typically that would be the most loss. And then that's on page 2 of that report for the 16 and 17.
Got it. And as I magnify it and look a little closer at the report, it does have all the data that I need, but we did get it today, this afternoon, so I haven't had a chance to really dive into it. So this information is good. I just wish we would have had it a little earlier. I mean, it's not, I just requested it this morning, but I know it's been out there. So basically, it's hard to still pinpoint where that turnover, so that model 4 may not be as effective as a result of that, which I can accept that. I mean, but at least now with this data, as we move forward into this next year, we can start to try to take those numbers down and determine why we're seeing that turnover rate and identify that this is it. Okay, so thank you for answering that question for me. Mr. Elizondo, early college high schools, since they're not title campuses, we won't be able to put any title funds for supporting early college initiative. I just want to confirm that.
That's correct.
Okay. And the reason I say is we have positions here right now that are coordinator positions that we're going to be adding to our payroll, but there's no way that we can have them paid by title money.
That's correct.
Okay. Are we able to have them as 1 year instead of sort of like if we bring anyone aboard that it might be only this 1 year we do that? Because I'll go ahead and echo what Ms. Canoyer had mentioned at our last meeting. The sustainability of that program is now in question. Can we afford to pay the increased cost? I certainly don't want anyone in that position to think that we're full steam ahead with this initiative based on our cost structures. So
Sure.
is that something that?
Sure, definitely. When the board approves that position, if the board wanted to put a 1 year funding limitation on that position and to be considered next year again, that could definitely be done. And when the candidates are being interviewed and offered that position, they would be told that it was only for 1 year. Now, also to kind of give you a little bit of, gosh, I'm having a hard time with my words today, I'm sorry, but to give you a little bit more peace of mind, is that in any time, even if we do have people that are under contract and the board decides to do a, not a RIF, but a program, thank you very much, program change, then at that time, anybody who works for, in that particular program can be reassigned or released if we can't reassign them without the board having any kind of contractual issues. But of course, if the board already knows up front that it's maybe a 1 year position, it's always nicer to share that with the employees so that they can plan accordingly.
So just for my understanding, if that were to happen, just so I can know how it plays out, does the employee retain that salary that they were hired in when they're reassigned, or they reassigned and then it's a new salary that they?
If it's under a program change, then no, they have to apply and they would be the first to be considered, and we can try to move them in that direction, but it would be at whatever the new position salary is without them having any entitlement to what they were currently making.
Okay. Good. Now, last budget meeting, you probably had been saying it, but when we had our public hearing, you really put it out there, our potential deficit that we may have in next academic year, not now. And so looking at 12 million, that sounds pretty steep. So I want to tell my colleagues that we obviously need to begin that budget cycle July 1st in terms of discussing what we need to do for those strategies. And of course, I did request information about if we did have a tax rate increase, what that would bring in terms of revenue. And I think it was $5 million from state funds and $9.5 for local funds, which would be $14.5 million in funds. But that won't take us very far, because then we'll end up being almost in the same boat. But when I looked at that 12 million deal, expansion was part of it. So we're talking about opening up 2 more elementary schools. That'll diminish over a couple of years. That would be my thought. So as we're looking at bringing these schools in, are they truly there to alleviate overcrowding, or was there growth incorporated in the motives behind building those schools?
It was both.
I'm thinking it was both. I remember both. So again, just to reiterate, you did not build into the plan any projected student growth, new students into this. You just worked on current students, right?
Correct.
Okay, so there is a potential we will see some revenue from that growth.
Yes, this is not a permanent situation.
Yeah.
This is hopefully once things get back on track again, we start bringing students back into the district. We stop opening new schools for a little bit. We'll take a little breather and things will get back to the way they should be, where the board can give raises and do those kind of things. But we are going through a few years here where if it wasn't for us losing students, and if it was only that we were just having a little bit of, hey, we need to add more staff here, we need to add more staff there, we wouldn't be quite in this bind. If we would have continued to, last year we lost, I think if I remember correctly, the number was like 600 or 700 in ADA. This year we lost another almost 300, I think, or 200 or 300 in ADA. That would have put us back at a number closer to 22 to 22.5 ADA. We would have another $5 or $6 million in state revenue right now. But because we are losing that many kids, it has a big impact on how much money we get from the state. So once we can normalize that again, then we'll be back in a better situation to move forward.
And I kind of think that that's where we'll be. But one thing to put out there for us to think of this next academic year is, do we need to have both schools opened? I mean, do we just simply draw lines? It was suggested by a good friend of mine that could be a good idea, especially if we don't have control and we're losing students. So now we need to identify where we're losing them and see if we need to redraw lines. I don't recall, and please make me aware, when is the last time we've had an in-depth discussion about redrawing lines?
Well, it's been a while because the last ones were more natural. When we opened Copperfield, for instance, and Rolling Meadows, they weren't because we were trying to move kids from one school to the other due to trying to close a school or anything like that. It was because we were building a new school, and it was going to be to alleviate overcrowding at those particular campuses. And sometimes, I'm not saying that's the case right now because we've been trying, but we haven't gotten there yet. When parents move their students from our district elsewhere, sometimes it is because of overcrowding. They're going to an elementary school that has 850, 900 students, and they feel like their kids kind of just being lost in the shuffle, and so they take them out of the district somewhere else. And when they get a neighborhood school, it's back and it's more manageable in their mind, and their kids are safer and are being able to be successful, then they'll bring their students back. That's when we're seeing that happen at Veterans Memorial right now, where a lot of those kids were, or not a lot, but some of those students were out of our district because they didn't want them going to Judson High School because it was too large of a school. And now some of those students that are our students are coming back to us now at that school. And I think that at the elementaries, that's kind of what happens as well. And not only that, in those particular neighborhoods where we're going to build, for instance, the elementary school in the south, part of the district, they're developing homes in that same neighborhood. So we're going to pick up more kiddos from that area. And the school that is in Wortham Oaks is the same situation. They're continuing to build more and more houses out there. So some of those students there at Wortham Oaks are the ones that are leaving our district as well, because they have to go to Rolling Meadows, which is, as far as the parents are concerned, kind of too far from home, and the school's overcrowded. So once we put a school in their neighborhood, then I think they'll feel more comfortable sending them in their neighborhood and bringing the students back from whatever charter school or whatever other district they're attending right now.
Well, I did want to just not take too much time about next year, but the point of bringing that up was to also say we have multiple strategies to employ before we get there. And obviously the tax rate increase would be one if we wanted to tell the community we need their support to sustain these great programs like STEM and early college. I am extremely optimistic that our HR audit will help us identify areas of inefficiency. There is actually potential for us to even examine days in terms of what we have. We have employees with 216 days to put them down to 206. I mean, so we have a potential here to see what that workload looks like and save millions in terms of doing that. In addition to that, addressing the redrawing of lines with the expansion of our elementary schools. Do we really need two, or just can we deal with one based on the student loss that we're seeing in the district? We, at least I would hope in the next several months, we will have a finance committee that will kind of continuously keep us on track and essentially start working towards putting pieces of that budget together way, way early. And then the other strategy, too, would be to make a commitment to forego putting 1.2 to 1.5 million in buses for 2 or 3 years, waiting for the next potential infrastructure bond that we have, and then buying them there. I see a savings, because that's 1.5 that we're taking out of M&O, and we're buying buses where maybe the community would support that. So certainly, if not, then we just have to buy them all at once, and we get them done, so we're in task. But all of those ideas aren't, I don't know, we need to discuss them, but they're strategies to address this issue. Because people want to work at a district that's going to recognize them for their work. We're challenging them to help our students they're going elsewhere, and we're losing. We can't do that. We can't continue to do that. My colleagues all voiced their support of the incentive. I too echo the same sentiment. We've made this commitment to the community. We need to stick to that commitment. Additionally, I don't think it's going to even be at 1.8. I already put bets. We're going to have a higher turnover rate than we did last year, and that's not good. So I might be wrong, and I want to be wrong, but at this point, that's what I'm thinking is going to happen. And then the 1.5, during our discussion last meeting, we talked about it a little bit, and you sort of forecast that if we did a 1% raise or a 1.5% raise, coupled with keeping the incentive, that we would be looking at probably a $1 to $1.2 million savings from what was shown in the books. So is that just too much of a stretch? Because you mentioned right now you're not extremely comfortable with making that forecast.
I think, based on my numbers here, that if you were to keep the $1.8 million retention incentive, and if you were to do a 1% pay increase, I'm going out on a limb here and I really don't feel comfortable doing that, you'd probably end up at about $5.3 to $5.4 million, which is really close to the same number that if you were to just do away with the incentive and do a 3%, or that first model of the TASB recommendation, just to kind of put that in perspective.
Well, and I appreciate that, and I'll just remind my colleagues that by splitting it and having 1.8 tied into a one-time fee, we're not paying it next budget cycle. And that's why you had mentioned about there being a savings even for next year. So strategically, we want to save money. The bonus is already out there. It's incorporated as part of the raise. We pay a 1 or 1.5% raise, and we don't have to pay it by boosting it to 3% next year and paying on that. So we'd save money with that strategy. So I think there is viability with the idea to have a pay increase smaller than the 3 and the incentive, in essence, doing both, because I believe obviously our employees deserve that. So that's sort of the direction I'd like to see us go in terms of adopting the budget. And then all these other strategies will play out, and we'll look at trying to be more efficient and saving money in other areas. Okay, I will yield.
Mr. LaFoille?
Jose, I'm going to be real easy on you. Have you adjusted the pay for the custodians who are getting below poverty level?
In the TASB recommendations, there were adjustments for all of those individuals. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that we were talking about was that in the event that the board decided that we were not going to do pay increases right now, but that we were going to adopt one of the agenda items, saying that we would come back to revisit that particular item in August after the legislative session was over, that if we determined, we, the board, all of us determined that we could not afford to still do a pay increase for all of our employees, that we could at least look at all the employees that were making under $10 an hour and try to do something for them. Because, and we're talking about the custodians and the child nutrition workers, the general workers that are making $9.60, $9 and in that range, to see if we can at least help them, because probably for $300,000 or $400,000, we could do something to help that group of folks that are really being paid at a very low wage.
It's below being low. It's pitiful. I don't know if anybody can live on that kind of pay. Pay rent, pay gas money, everything else. Bill Miller's pays $13 an hour, and they're talking about going up higher. So I think we got to look at them a little bit. I'm sure we're looking at all the teachers and everything. They spent years going to school. But this guy's working for a living the same as they are. So I think you get up about $12 an hour, it'd be a lot better.
I don't know that I can do 12. Well, we'll have to discuss it if that comes up later. But
Miss Eaton?
First, I have to get close. I want to apologize for being late. this meeting was rescheduled from last week, yada, yada, yada. Y'all don't need to hear all that. But, you know, you just mentioned something about Bill Miller, and they're opening up a new one on FM 78, by the way, FM 78 in Foster Road, and you're absolutely right, okay? They're paying more than what we're paying. Along with IKEA, there's a new IKEA opening up at the end of, God, it's right off of 1604. They bought all that property, they building a shopping center, right, yada, yada, yada. We already discussed that. There's just a couple of things that I'm confused about. Now, I saw in this report where it says that we're going to save like $1.8 million. Remember, I'm a real estate agent. So, along with my fellow board members and I'm sure the staff, you know, I look at things from my perspective as well. And as a real estate agent, I know that our district is growing by leaps and bounds. I get calls from overseas in the middle of the night, hey, I want to come to Judson School District, you know. So, what is going on? Because the people that are calling me, they're not exempt like I am, 100% disabled veteran from paying school taxes. So they're coming in, they're paying school taxes and beyond. So I don't understand how we're having this continued growth within the district as far as homeowners and new businesses. Okay, I'll back off the business because I done went to a couple of sessions and I want to choke Walmart. But anyway, I don't understand. You know, we should be having more funding coming in. And I understand, sir, that that's not, you know, you can't go out and as an individual and make these people pay their taxes, but we have more money coming in. There's some issues going on that I don't understand. Now, as a new board member, I'm gonna be honest with you, and I'm talking to the public now. I feel a little hoodwinked, okay, and bamboozled because I'm being asked to vote on something that I was newly elected to and to try and understand the dollars. And I want to do my due diligence. And I don't feel that I'm really quite able to do that based on the numbers I'm being presented, the issues that have come up in such a tight schedule. That schedule is not on this board nor this district. That schedule is based on the state's activities and when they are going to vote on what they're going to vote on. Because as this board sits here right now, we're still waiting on them to make up their mind on some things before we can make decisions. And so as far as when board members come on, that's something that we're going to discuss later. But right now, I want to do my job. And in an effort to do my job, I need to understand why we're having such a tight schedule on this money. It's nothing new. It comes every year. We have to do the same thing. And I see the comparison that you sent us. Great job. Miss Betty, I love you. Okay, great job. The staff is doing a great job. But where's the hiccup?
So let me go back to address one of the issues. The way our state funding model works is that the more local taxes you raise when you're at a $1.04 tax rate, okay, the more local taxes you raise, the less the state gives you. So it's not a dollar for dollar, but just to give you an idea, for every dollar you raise locally, so the more taxpayers are giving us here out of our local taxpayers, and I just want to make sure that you understand that our taxpayers are great. They pay, most of our taxpayers, the vast majority, pay their taxes on time without, they may come in and complain a little bit, but they pay their taxes on time. So we're collecting the taxes. We're at in excess of a 98% collection rate when it comes to collecting our local taxes. The problem, though, lies is that when you're collecting that $1 extra from our local taxpayers, the state's saying, oh, that's great. We're not going to give you that dollar now because we're going to take it away because you're getting it from your local taxpayers.
And it's a dollar for dollar exchange?
It's not exactly, but it's pretty close. So this year, if we look at the on page number 4 of the document in your board book, and you look at where it says total local revenue up there, at the very top it says $9.7 million in the net change column, and
yes,
it's for the roll call current year taxes. You're seeing that we're picking up about $9.7 million in more revenue this year compared to last year, local taxpayer dollars. And that's because of the increase in values in our district. Well, if you go a little bit further down that page where it starts talking about state revenue,
Yes.
and if you start looking down that page, you'll see that, you see a number there that says minus $7,282,000.
$282,997.
Right. So we picked up $9 million up here. The state says, oh, well, we're going to short you that $7 million because you picked up more locally. So it's not dollar for dollar, but it's still a substantial amount of money. And so therefore, that's where we all thought at one point, well, not all of us thought because we knew how the way it worked, but when the JW Marriott was going to be in our district, they thought,
Oh, my God, don't get me started on them.
Our problems are solved. They're going to pay so much tax dollars that we're going to be a rich district. Well, what happens, and this is kind of that, you probably have heard the Robin Hood concept. So when you look at districts like Alamo Heights, now even Seguin ISD, because of the power things that they've had over there, they become what's called Chapter 41 districts. So not only does the state reduce your money like I just explained to you, but they also say, hey, now you're even collecting way too much money, more than we can reduce, so send us some of your money because we're going to send it somewhere else. And so that's unfortunately the way that our state funding model works, is that they are, the reason that you would think we're adding all these homes, how come we can't do better? Well, because the state's saying, well, that's great, you're doing real good locally, picking up taxes, we're going to lower your state revenue. And so that's where we have these issues. And like I said, it's not unique to Judson, it's across the state. If you go, I was sharing with the board members at the last meeting, if you go to Northeast website and look at what they posted about their budget, the superintendent tells you there, the state has cut funding, and they'll say, way back a few years ago when they did that, I can't remember the exact year, but they cut like $4.5 billion, and they're yet to restore those funds. And every year they keep taking more and more away because, again, the more your local values go up, the less money the state's going to give you because you're collecting more money locally. It is unfortunately a complicated little situation, but unfortunately that's the way the schools are funded.
Okay. My second issue is, and I know we're gonna have to deal with this later, but a verification process for students that belong in our district and those that don't. I'm just being honest, okay? I own more than one home in the district, so I'm paying buku taxes. No, not on the home I live in, but the other ones, yes. And my grandson goes to Hartman. When they first opened, there was like 3 cars in front of me to drop him off. Now there's a train in front of me. And I don't mean the tracks I cross. Something is wrong. So, later we'll talk about fixing that. Because that's money that our students are entitled to, our teachers are entitled to, our staff is entitled to, and they're not getting. So we need to fix that too.
Sure. Well, that reminds me of something that one of our staff members brought up after last meeting, but it's not something you're going to want to hear. That another way that we could potentially bring more money into the district, which we're not recommending by any means at this time, but just putting things on the table, is becoming an open enrollment school district, which means that any student that lives anywhere can come to our school district. And while we wouldn't gain any local property value because they don't live in our district, we would collect money from the state for their ADA. Now, the downside of that, typically when a parent's going to bring a child into our district is because they want to go to a particular school. And I would gather to say that those particular schools that they would like to come to are probably capped because we're already at capacity. So maybe once we open the other schools, depending on how we are, if the board wants to look at that, we can definitely look at it and see. Of course, other districts don't like for us to do that because it affects them as well negatively. But it is something that's out there, something that somebody brought up, that just to share with y'all, that may be a possibility that we can look at. But it wouldn't help your issue because if we did that, then potentially there could be a lot of other kids showing up at our schools that don't live in our school district.
I understand the other districts may not want that to happen, but if it's beneficial to us, I'm on the Judson School Independent School District Board, and I'm looking out for Judson. Just like, I don't understand, we're losing staff, we're losing teachers to other school districts because they've received grants or whatever they're doing to hustle away our employees. So I understand that we need to do what we can to show them that for the longevity, we can produce. We may not be able to give it to you right now, but stay with us and we'll be able to give it to you a little later for loyalty. And so we have to think as a board on those terms too. We have to reward people for loyalty because no one, I was blessed to be able to go to school and get a master's degree in education. Because I served 28 years in the United States Army, I don't have school debt. But there are a lot of teachers we have that don't have that same benefit. And so we have to be able to reward them for their loyalty to the district, especially our good teachers, our good principals, okay? We have to be able to reward them some type of way. Thank you, Madam President.
Ms. Kenoyer?
Round two, because I forgot something on the last round. One of my concerns about the information we got from TASB, and I want to be sure that it is included as they look at how we are rectifying some of the issues that we have with our pay. I know that there have been issues with campus administration and some inequities there in pay. I know that there are some campus administrators who don't have pay worksheets in their files, and I know that there are some where the pay worksheets don't accurately reflect the guidelines put forth in our compensation manual. So my directive, if I'm allowed to give one, is to make sure that every single one of those campus administrator files is pulled, that there is a worksheet, and that it does accurately reflect what those compensation manuals say. Because we can't afford to lose more good administrators. And I'm afraid we may if we don't take care of that issue.
Ms. Rodriguez?
So my comment was in response to Mr. Macias from way long time ago. I've done some research on teacher retention, and I think there are plenty of things that yes, pay does influence teacher retention in the long term. Like, I was in a position as a teacher where I didn't get a raise for 2 years in a row, and I did leave. For many other reasons as well. But I think what also influences teachers' decisions is the way that leadership happens at the school. So if teachers feel like they have a voice in that leadership, then they're more likely to stay for the long term. I think, too, the reason that we see turnover in years 0 through 5, oftentimes teachers don't stay with their first school and they want to look for something that is a better fit for them. And I wonder if there are things we can do as a district to make sure that they stay in Judson, but maybe have a different option for a school that fits their personality and leadership style differently. And then making sure that workload and student discipline are sustainable for teachers. And I think and also providing pathways for career advancement for teachers that are beyond just, well, in order to earn more money, I have to go be a principal. Which is what the only choice that's given to a lot of teachers for career advancement. So I think we can be creative about ways that we retain teachers and still give consistent raises, but I don't know that targeting a certain year of experience for a raise is going to do much more than retain them maybe 1 extra year rather than for the long term. So that would be my hesitation with doing anything with playing around with those numbers.
Michelle?
Thank you. You used the phrase that I was going to ask you about, Mr. Elizondo. What if open enrollment were a strategy? I was going to ask you what would be the hindrance, what would be the benefit? And I think you already explained it. We could open it up it would be good to open up to other districts. It would be a hindrance for other districts, but as Mrs. Eaton said, we're only sensitive to our district, not others. And another possibility other than open enrollment, and none of them are really ideal, actually, because none of them are really ideal. But the tax situation and raising that tax base, and that's not good either for those that have situations that they would not be able to. We're just in a dilemma. I really don't know what the best solution is, and so I'm looking to you for that.
Thank you, Ms. Pichel. I think we've had great discussion, but I think we need to, of course, start making decisions. Mr. Macias mentioned spoke very eloquently, and he brings up a lot of good points. And one of the things he said is that, our staff deserves a raise. I don't think there's anyone on the board that doesn't think we deserve, and certainly more than 3%, 50% if we could do it. 75%. I think we deserve a raise on the board also, which is great. All of our employees work very, very hard. And Mr. LaFoyle brought up a great point, and so did Ms. Pichel, about our auxiliary staff. And we know they work very hard, but we also know that some auxiliary staff, as we saw this year, abused their overtime, and were making $60,000 overtime. When one employee is making $40,000, $60,000 in overtime, that's a concern. And so I know that the administration has already taken care of that, and we're not going to let that happen again. Regardless of what decisions we make tonight, everyone's going to have to be more fiscally responsible, to include all the campuses, all the departments, in particular with attendance. We have got to educate our parents so that they understand one absence costs money. And I know we had that recording, and some parents got upset that you were telling them, I don't know, you cost the district $85, whatever it was. And so we had a parent complain, or maybe two parents complain, and so we took it off. And maybe we need to look at that again, put that back out there, because it's okay to upset a parent. Maybe they'll get tired of hearing how much money they're causing the district to lose. And then start getting their child here. I like Ms. Pichel's point about getting a 1% raise. Of course, I was trying to do the math, but I know it's not just as easy as multiplying by 0.01. I figured that out very quickly. But certainly, I would be open to at least looking at that later on, again, after the legislature meets. And I respect Mr. Macias's point on, we can't wait. Well, I feel like we have to wait. I don't feel comfortable making that decision right now. Can you tell me what would happen what would the budget be if we kept the retention incentive and then changed the student-teacher ratio? What was proposed? So instead of the $9 million deficit?
Yes. If we, a little while ago, I added that $4.4 million to the revenue side.
Correct.
One-time transfer in from the construction fund. So in doing that, and then increasing the student-to-teacher ratio, which would be about a $5 million savings there, and keeping the retention incentive, we would be in a situation where we would have a surplus of $177,000.
Right, be on the positive side. Of course, knowing that, though, after July 30th, we hope we have some answers. And they may take no action. And they may take action and say, here's some extra cash also, which would be really nice.
Sure. And just because, and the reason we had done those, and I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, go ahead.
The reason we did the 18-19 looking forward is because of that, just because of exactly that. Because when people hear, oh, you have a surplus of $177,000, that sounds phenomenal. That sounds great. However, when you consider that $4.4 million is one time and it's gone the next year, and then we're also doing it at the expense of increasing the class size ratio, $5 million. So the 4.4 is great. That's no issue there. But the $5 million is a problem. For me, it's a problem because I don't like doing that. But that's the only reason it's going to look like we have a surplus. But the following year, that 4.4 is gone, and so right away you're back into a deficit of almost $4 million. Actually, in excess of $4 million. And so it looks good. It'll look good for this 1 year, and then we're going to have
It even looks good for July,
Yes.
and maybe only July.
Right.
And then I think we have to look at increasing the tax rate and certainly trying to get some more revenue in to start building or trying to build.
Sure, and if
build
that
up
is
our
something that
fund
the
balance.
board would like to explore, increasing the tax rate, we could definitely bring in a few experts with Lynn Milton Casey Group to model a few examples and have the board. I mean, there's different ways to do it, right? You could do a little stair step where you do a little bit, or you can go to the voters and say, we want the whole 13 pennies, but we're not going to implement it all in 1 year. We're going to go ahead, because otherwise, if you do a little bit, you have to go back every time, which is
Correct.
okay. But if you don't want to go through the expensive election costs and everything all the time, then you can say, well, we want authorization for the whole 13 pennies, but we're only going to do 2 or 3 pennies a year or something like that until we get to that level. So it's not a huge shock to them at one time.
Right.
Just some different ideas. There's
Yep.
also another concept, which I think you may be familiar with, that we've talked about in the past and we've kind of
TRE.
shied away from because it's called a tax rate swap. And what a tax
TRE.
rate swap is, and I'm going to throw something else into the mix here.
The
but-
tax ratification election, that one?
Well,
No?
the tax ratification election is the 13 pennies.
Correct.
The tax rate swap is when you do something like this, and we still have to go to the public for this, but let's say that the money we collect to pay the mortgage payment for the bonds, if you will, let's say it's, just for discussion purposes, it's 40 pennies, 40 cents. So then you say, well, I'm going to take those 13 pennies out of those 40 cents, and I'm going
And
to
move
move
it
them over to
over.
the local maintenance side instead. So the tax rate for the taxpayer stays the same. There's no change to them. They don't pay any additional money. It's exactly the same. But what happens is now you're generating another $5 million from the state. And so throughout the years, you're collecting your taxes, you're sending those 13 pennies worth of collections back to the mortgage fund, if you will, because you got to pay those bonds anyway. But you get to keep that $5 million, and the taxpayer didn't pay anything for that. It stayed the same. The only problem is there are some strings attached to that from the agency, and you can do that for a couple of years, maybe 2-3 years, and then you get into a situation where it gets kind of complicated. So I'm not going to go into the real minutia, but you get to a situation where if the board has already committed to spending those monies on recurring costs, at the third year or so,
You
you're
don't
not
wanna
going to
do
have
that.
that
You're
money
stuck.
anymore because you have to swap it back. And then all of a sudden you have $5 million worth of expenditures you had to find money for. So it's kind of like a little Band-Aid, but you got to plan for it, or otherwise when it gets ripped off, it's going to hurt really bad as well. So we can also model that for you and how that would work if we wanted to try that for a couple of years. But eventually there has to be something of a more permanent solution so that the board isn't having to deal with this every single year.
I think yes to all of that. The more information we have, we can make a more informed decision. And the other reason I'm really wanting to be persistent on waiting is if we wait, we actually have more information on personnel, on how many people actually left the district. I know we keep hearing, oh, everybody's leaving. Well, we're getting a lot. I think we had 6 or 7 from Northeast. And I don't know if I don't watch Northeast board meetings. I don't know if they're saying, oh my God, they're all going to Judson. But we've gotten, quite a few candidates. And so, and it happens all the time. Teachers are always leaving and then they come back, or we're getting people from other districts. It happens. And as Ms. Rodriguez said, it's not just about the pay. And we've had conversations about that. So if we change the student-teacher ratio, keep the retention incentive, then we're going to add a surplus right now, only for right now, $177,000.
That's correct, and there's also something else at play that's going to be coming up here in the very near future. To be able to get that $4.4 million, we have to sell those bonds. And I would much rather tell the rating agency that you adopted a $177,000
Sure, for
surplus
your
budget
ratings.
than you adopted a $8 or $9 million deficit budget, because that's going to say what
Increase your bond,
what's
your
going on,
ratings,
what's
right?
happening.
And we'll
Right,
get a
and it will
better,
increase-
better,
Right, because that will increase your credit risk.
Right.
And then the interest
better
rates
for
will be a
selling
lot
the
higher
bonds.
for our taxpayers to pay those interest payments on. Just something else. I'm not trying to play any games with them. We're going to fully disclose.
No, right, it's
but
true.
just to kind
It's
of.
all accurate.
Right,
okay, thank you.
sure.
Yeah, there were two things. If the plan that TASB had provided us, it had those additional adjustments, right? So when we're looking at the plan in our board book, it shows the salary and years of experience, but I don't see where it has the additional adjustments like we had at our June 8th meeting. So those adjustments are already built into the salary, correct?
Yes, sir.
So even if we were to say 1%, looking, for example, at year 14, TASB had recommended that they have an additional adjustment of $1,000. So now you have $1,000 that year 14 teacher is going to make in addition to the 1%. So would we end up keeping the adjustments and the raise, or when I make my motion, do I need to say recommended plan with the additional adjustments? Because when I look at the additional adjustments, there are many years that are impacted. And so what do you have?
When you make your motion, I would just refer to it as Model 1 for TASB, Model 2 for TASB. Model 3, or Model 4. And when you do that, it's going to incorporate everything. It's going to incorporate the pay increase plus any adjustments. Now, if you're not wanting the adjustments and just the pay increase, then please say that. But if you're wanting both, then you would just say adopt model number 4 or whatever it is from TASB.
And if we did that, it would change all the numbers that you have here, because I think
Oh, definitely.
in this matrix of budget, you have them incorporated in our deficit. So if we were to adopt them without the adjustments and give a flat percentage rate, that would make a difference. I think TASB recommended the adjustments for a good reason, and they're sort of, the major part of those adjustments are years 8 through 21, which, I mean, I'm looking at that retention aspect as well. So if we're going to target doing any adjustment, TASB did provide that. So I just want to remind my colleagues, that was already kind of put in there and based on these numbers. So even if we did a 1% raise, it's not as detrimental for years 8 through 21 because they have the adjustments. So certainly it gives us an opportunity to play with that. And I do notice, too, that on our agenda, closed session is not there, so we do not have the ability to talk to our attorneys about what type of course we could take. But I'd be willing to think that we have recourse. We have an opportunity to defy and say we can't pay it, or we won't. But we won't be alone in that fight, I assure you that. So cautious is fine, I understand that, but in this instance, like I said, today is today, and we owe a lot of gratitude to our employees. So that being stated, Mr. Elizondo, if I were to suggest a 1% increase with the additional adjustments, then you would just have to recalculate the numbers. We don't have that data here, though, right now, right?
That is correct.
Okay. And so, no chance on ballparking it, right?
I kind of did a little while ago,
Okay.
hesitantly, and said that if you did the $1.8 million, if you kept the retention incentive and you did a 1%, it would probably equal to doing the 3%, the first model that TASB did, which is in the neighborhood of about $5.3 to $5.6 million.
We went out for bonds this May, right? Or,
The voters approved the 60.
and we went out for them, not a couple of years before that, or last year? I can't remember. We have
1 year. 1 year prior.
1 year.
Last year.
And last year, when we adopted our budget, was it a deficit?
Yes, sir. It was 4.
It didn't affect our ratings, right? Or did that affect our rating?
It
It did? So you're
We-
speaking from experience. How did it impact it?
I speak to the rating agencies, right, because I'm the person they interview to talk about how they're going to do this.
Okay.
So when they look at a 1 year, and they issued a report last year, which we can definitely, I think we shared it with y'all, but we can definitely send it again, from both the rating agencies that we use, which are Fitch and Moody's, where they were, they said they were comfortable because of our fund balance and because it was a 1 year thing. And that, well, they said a lot of other things, which I'm not going to sit here and be conceited about. But they felt like we would be able to correct ourselves if we determined that this was going to be detrimental to the financial health of the district, and that we had the resources available to pay the bonds. And so it did not, at that time, it did not affect our rating. They kept it what it was before.
Okay. So in 2016, because Ms. Pashal had asked for this data, we show what the adopted deficit was for last year, 2016, 2017, right? In 2015, 2016, it shows the years. So I'm thinking it has not had that adverse effect, and we should have more in our fund balance than we did back then, or did we have more in our fund balance over the last couple of years? I'm really just trying to understand that.
For the information you're talking about, in 14-15, the board adopted a $1.9 million deficit budget. When we finished that year, it was not in deficit. We had a surplus at the end of that year. In 15-16, the board adopted a surplus. Well, actually, it was a balanced budget. It's $1,260. So it was a balanced budget. We ended up again with a surplus that year. In 16-17, the board adopted a $4 million deficit budget. I'm thinking that's going to be more like $2 million when it's all said and done, deficit. And the rating agency, like I said, when you're looking at a school district having a $40 million fund balance and they go into it $2 million, they're going to not be too concerned about it. But if we adopt a budget that is $9 million or $7 million deficit, they're going to start getting concerned, especially when they start seeing a trend of, hey, last year you adopted a $4 million one, this year you're adopting one that's maybe double that. What's your plan for next school year? And then if we start talking about, well, we're going to open the school, we're going to do all this, then it's going to put them, I don't want to speak to what it's going to do to them, but my mind would tell me that if I were in their shoes, I'd start getting concerned and saying, okay, what's the plan here? How are you going to correct? Because you're going down that, you're starting to go down that slippery slope, and how are you going to get back up the other direction?
Well, we certainly would start on July 1st, in my hope. But also keep in mind that you've said this many a times as well, we're not unique. This issue of financial issues goes across the county. So this same banker or bond, whatever that might be, would be looking at anyone else thinking, everyone is going through this, and actually Judson's doing better than most, certainly better than Northeast ISD and maybe Northside. So we should be able to hold our own. That's my thought on that.
I don't want to say that we're doing better than Northeast or Northside. I just want to put that out there.
Well, you mentioned about their deficit before.
I did, but I don't want anybody to think that we're saying, hey, they're doing a lousy job over there, because I don't feel that way at all.
Hey, we're
I think everybody's
Judson.
trying to manage what they have. And I know that, especially because of what happened in the past years with the economy and all the scrutiny that the rating agencies have received, they're not going to hesitate to downgrade all of us. Once we don't meet their credit model, they're going to say, hey, the whole education system's in a bind in Texas. And so they will do whatever they have to do, because they have to defend themselves. They have to protect themselves, because if not, investors will buy bonds. And if the bondholders can't pay the bonds, they're going to come back to the rating agencies and say, hey, you told me this guy had A+, they were an excellent credit risk, and now they can't pay their bonds a year later. And so they have to be very careful when they're doing that, and they want to make sure that those ratings mean something when they're issuing them for bondholders to buy bonds, because they're spending billions and billions of dollars based on those ratings.
The idea of keeping or increasing the student-teacher ratio in elementary school is alarming for me. We already have, elementary is a very delicate time in terms of student achievement, and by increasing that load, I was looking at the information you provided, and it looks like there would be an enormous impact at that level with our 19 current elementary schools. So I couldn't support it, but I mean, this budget is a lot of things, and there are many variables. So if I did support it, what I would want to see is that all of our title campuses, our elementary campuses, receive extra support from title funding for more instructional support, like teachers, to help counteract what we've sort of done. Title campuses with economically disadvantaged populations need that support. So we start focusing, and I don't know where Ms. Barra is, but bottom line is, if we take those title dollars and now make a commitment that we're not going to have as many programs, and we're going to focus on teachers, I think that will kind of counteract the issue of voting to improve an increased student-teacher ratio. Give me some thoughts, Mr. Elizondo. What are you thinking?
I wish I could say yes, because it would be easier. I could just agree with you and say that's great. There's this thing that's called comparability, and it's a Title I requirement. And what the focus or the bottom line when you go through all their calculations is to make sure that you're not doing what is called supplanting, that you're not taking local dollars away and replacing federal dollars for programs that you're offering across to all the districts. Now, to all the other schools. We'd have to run through some numbers. It may be possible, but I just want to put that out there that we have to check this comparability issue first before we commit to that. Because we're doing it across the district at all of the elementary schools, we may be able to do some kind of a class size reduction or some kind of other resource out there for some of those schools, depending on how much money we have. But we need to be careful that we don't get into trouble with that comparability calculation where the government feels like we're supplanting, taking local dollars away and putting federal dollars in, because federal dollars are only supposed to be using to supplement the program, not to supplant for local dollars. So once we go through that, I could give you a definite yes or a definite no. But right now, I'm going to have to give you a maybe, just cautiously until we look at it.
I could take a maybe if that's what we end up deciding. But essentially, there are ways to craft that support. So if instructional support doesn't mean teachers, but it means increased tutoring, or we're doing the job to help those students. And so at this point, when we have a fuller classroom, I'm certain that there'll be a need for more support, because now you're taking 2 more students into a classroom, and we're not able to reach every student now, so we're going to have potential issues there. So I certainly would want us to be extremely focused on that. So, thank you.
Go ahead, Ms. Pichon.
I just want to call for the question. I think we've had plenty of unless I don't want to take away from any other discussion that anybody else want to have.
I think everybody's
Call for the
spoken.
question now.
I think everyone's spoken. Ms. Pichon calls for the question. Do I have a second? Hmm?
If she wants to pull it, I'm done.
Oh, you're ready? Okay. I'd like to amend the motion. I'd like to amend the motion to consider and take possible action regarding approval of the proposed budget for the 2018 fiscal year to include a change in student-teacher ratio as proposed and presented by administration.
Second.
Sec-
Is there,
Yeah, you would have to second if we want to. So now we need to take a vote on the amendment.
Could I ask for something real quick?
Yes, go
Because
ahead.
I don't know if you want to, if you feel like incorporating it into your amendment or not, but if you could also include that $4.4 million one-time transfer from the reimbursement, that way it's all kind of encompassed and clear.
Sure, okay, so consider and take possible action regarding approval of the proposed budget for the 2018 fiscal year to include a change in student-teacher ratio as proposed by administration and to include a transfer of the one-time $4.4 million reimbursement from construction funds. So that's my amended motion.
second.
Second, Ms. Pichon. And now we need to vote on the amendment. So we're voting on that now. Oops. Deborah, Miss Eaton, she's going to be the last one. I was supposed to do it last, I forgot. Okay, so we've now voted on the amendment, and now we need to vote on the amended motion.
I'd like to move that, on that amendment, that we adopt the budget for 1% increase, including additional adjustments as recommended by TASB.
I think that comes under item C. Correct? No?
No, it would come under this particular
Oh,
item if you would like to
okay.
do that.
Second.
So you're amending the amendment? Is that correct, Mr. Macias?
So,
Yes, ma'am.
oh, excuse me. I'm
He-
sorry.
Okay, I'm sorry, and if you're going to do that.
Actually,
I was going to say.
it could just be
please-
a motion. I don't think I used amend, or did I use amend? Okay, it was just a motion. I just put that emotion out there then.
We have a motion on the floor already.
Right.
Right, we've
So-
got
At a
it.
time.
So
I was
then-
going to say, if you were going to propose anything like that,
You'd have to
I
amend.
don't know how if it would be legal defendable, but if you would include the language, just to say that this would include any pay increase that would be mandated by the legislature during special session, during this time period, during the
Then it
July,
needs to
August
be an
timeframe.
amendment, and I'll go ahead and include that language, and I think that's appropriate. Sorry, Ms. Pichon, you had a question?
But I don't want to be out of order. So, Mr. Macias, then for clarity's sake, you're talking about not waiting on the special session. You're talking about making a move right now.
I am, and I think, as Mr. Elizondo had just stated, the fail-safe on it is that you stated if we say in the language that, I didn't write it down, so you put it perfectly in terms of if we are charged with that. Yes, I'm laughing because I got to write this down, so it's exact. So repeat that for me, please.
Well, I just want to be clear, again, because I don't want you to come back and say, well, Mr. Elizondo said that our attorneys, I have spoken to Paige Kyle twice on the phone about this, and she sent an email about it, recommending that we wait, or the board wait, until after the legislative session to provide any salary increases, if they were going to do so, to make sure that they weren't going to have to provide them on top of whatever the board approved. However, if the board does not want to follow that guidance, I would at least suggest that the board include in their motion for any kind of pay increase at this time to say that this pay increase would include any requirements regarding pay increases that the special legislative session that will be convening in July of 2017 would adopt.
So, Mr. Macias, would you read your amended motion?
Amended.
Amended.
I'm going to be called to reread what I wrote, and I can't even do that. So let's give this a shot. I'd like to amend the motion to adopt the TASB study, a 1% salary increase, including the additional adjustments that were recommended, that this pay would include any required pay that the Texas legislature deems during their special session.
We have an amended motion by Mr. Macias. We have a second?
Second.
Okay, second by Ms. Canoyer. So now we need to, I'm going to have to just keep going to voting because okay. So now we're going to vote on the amendment to the amendment that Mr. Macias.
Ms. Eaton has stated she's confused.
Oh, I'm sorry.
You heard me way down there?
I did. I heard you way down here.
Okay, because you made a motion, right?
Right, but he's now amending it
He's amending
to include
your
a one,
motion?
he's amending my motion to include a 1% raise. You want to read it? I don't want to misquote you.
Yes, but that already has accepted the student teacher rate. That's already been accepted. We've already voted to amend that.
We voted, no, we have not. We voted on the amendment, and now we have to vote on the amended motion. We have not done that yet. So you've now amended that amendment, and so now we have to vote on your amendment.
So mine's tied to yours, is what you're trying to say.
No, you've now
No,
amended it totally separate.
Now you see why I'm confused.
Well,
You want to read this plus yours. That's what you want to do, I think.
my intent was not to undo what we just voted on. I respect that we did,
But we haven't we only voted on the amendment
which
of the
was
motion.
accepted.
The amendment was-
Yeah.
We all just went to SLI, and so
I'm
we all
glad
have all these. We know, and here's the book that can help us also.
Well, we're
So-
going to work right through this for sure.
So, yeah, you're amending it, which is fine, and you have a second for Ms. Canoyer, and now we have to vote on the amended motion.
What I honestly want to avoid, and I'll go ahead and just pull, because I don't want to confuse, but if I don't get an opportunity to add my 1% because Mr. Lozano said it was also appropriate to, I could say it at this point. I just don't want to lose that opportunity of stipulating that motion.
Just to be clear, can he also do it on Part C, or no?
Part C. Let me read the motion language real quick. I don't think so.
So in addition to that.
No.
That was the intent. In addition to what we just passed, I wanted to add that as part of the amendment, not take over and cancel what we just voted. So it seems strenuous to have to say that, too. Couldn't the motion adopt both amendments? One's already been accepted. This amendment may or may not go through.
I'm sorry, sir, I'm not the legal person.
Sure.
I hate to give you the wrong information and then come back with a problem. I mean, the easiest thing is to do what Dr. Salinas said, that way you're covered 100%.
Right.
But that's
Is
up
to
you.
read this and add yours. That's what you,
Withdraw yours.
no, because he wants his on there.
I know, but he can withdraw it and make a new amendment.
Oh, yes, he can. Go ahead.
That would be better.
I struggled to read it the first time. Good Lord.
Well, you want this one also?
But it's important, so we're going to do it. So
You're going to amend the motion.
I'm going to amend the motion. I'll pull the previous motion. So I'm going to amend the motion to include what Dr. Salinas had stated earlier, which I know that our secretary has, but for the record, Dr. Salinas.
I can read it for you.
Yes, if you could.
Consider and take possible action regarding approval of the proposed budget for the 2018 fiscal year to include a change in student-teacher ratio as proposed by administration, and to also include a one-time reimbursement from construction funds for $4.4 million, a one-time transfer. And
to include the TASB recommendation of 1% with the additional adjustments, and that such a salary increase would include any requirements of pay increases that the legislature would make.
But that's doing it immediately, right? You want it to happen now?
Yes.
Okay.
That would be my preference, yes.
Okay. Okay.
So
Okay, so we're voting on that.
it hasn't been seconded yet.
Okay, do we have a second?
Second.
Okay, Ms. Eaton is seconding your motion, your amended motion. So now we're going to vote on the amended motion.
And just to be, just to be clear, if this motion fails, we're back to the original amendment
Correct.
that had passed, which is about the, just to be clear to everyone.
Correct.
Yeah. Okay, just to be clear.
Is everyone clear? We're voting on the amendment? You don't have to. If you don't second it, then it dies, and then we go back to the original one.
But she did.
But you did.
Which you can pull your second,
You can
and then
pull
we're
your
done.
second if you'd like.
Yeah, if there's not a second, it dies.
I would never take money out of teachers' pockets.
So does that mean you're keeping it? Okay.
Okay. So we're voting on the amendment? Motion fails 4-3. So now we're back to the first amended motion. I will read it again. Consider and take possible action regarding approval of the proposed budget for the 2018 fiscal year to include a change in student-teacher ratio as proposed by administration, and to also include a one-time transfer for the reimbursement from construction funds of $4.4 million.
Has it been seconded?
Yes, it has been seconded, and so now we're going to vote, and this is for real, vote, right? This is a real vote, again. Motion carries 7-0. Item B, consider and take possible action regarding rescission of an employee retention incentive to be paid during the 2017-2018 school year, which was previously approved by the board. Do I have a motion?
Motion.
Do I have a second? Motion, Mr. LaFoille, there is no second, and so the motion dies. No action. We'll move on to item number 3. Okay. All right. 2C, consider and take possible action regarding possible approval of mid-year wage and/or salary adjustments for all employees and a respective budget amendment.
Motion.
Okay.
And I'm sorry.
Okay, motion, Mr. Macias, second, Ms. Rodriguez.
And I was going to say, please, at some point before y'all vote, if you would actually read the recommendation, motion language that the attorney provided for us. Just where it says recommendation, that little.
I'm sorry, read on, tell me the page.
Sure, on page 45,
Okay.
45,
Oh, you want me to read?
right, before y'all vote.
It's recommended,
I
the
mean,
recommendation part?
yes, I mean, y'all can
Okay.
discuss or do whatever you want, but before you vote, please read.
Oh,
that
before we
language.
vote. But
It's
we're
any
okay
point. You
right
can do it now, whenever you
I
want.
can do it now, okay. I'll go back to 2C. It is recommended that the Board of Trustees approve a mid-year wage and/or salary adjustment for all employees during the 2017-2018 fiscal year to occur at some point after the conclusion of any legislative special sessions, which may include mandated increases in funding for district employees. Any mid-year wage and/or salary adjustment shall be retroactively applied to be effective as of the beginning of the 2017-2018 school year. A respective budget amendment will be approved when the pay adjustments are approved. Motion, Mr. Macias?
Second.
Second, Ms. Eaton. Any discussion? Let me move to discussion. Okay, Mr. Macias?
So this is the effort to, of course, add a salary increase after legislative session, right? Absolutely, hands down. So when would that take place, in September, October, or what does the timeline look like when we would revisit?
I think the legislative session, by the time it's over, it probably would be in August when we would want to bring this back.
Okay, so,
Probably at our either regular August board meeting or shortly thereafter,
Special
but
meeting.
sometime in August.
Yeah.
And then subject to the governor right afterwards approving or disapproving the recommendations.
That's a very good point, because he has a certain amount of time to do that, and it actually could carry us into September. But ideally, we'd want to approve this if we could in August, but Dr. Montoya is right. If the governor doesn't do it right away and he waits till September, we may have to wait till then.
well, then that's good, because this issue obviously isn't over yet. We still have an opportunity to provide raises for our employees. All right, just wanted the clarity. Thank you.
Ms. Pashal? Oh, sorry, I pushed it and I had already done it. It's your turn.
So this is, Mr. Elizondo, this mid-year, it's a hit for all employees. Now, there's discrepancy with that also, because if we're talking mid-year wage for those administrative employees that already have a higher salary than those that are auxiliary. Mid-year,
Like the middle of
And it's retroactive back to the beginning of the school year.
So if we do it in October, they go back to like August.
They'd get back pay.
okay.
It's not mid.
And let me kind of give you a little bit of background as to why we're having to do this. When an employee comes into our school district, and the employee, and really this is contracted employees, when the HR department brings to the board to approve contracts for employees, or the superintendent signs it during the fast tracking, what it says is that employee is agreeing to work for whatever is in the compensation plan. Once that happens, then legally, we're not supposed to pay anybody more than that, because then the state sees that as gift of public funds, because they've already agreed to work for a certain amount of money that's in the plan for that year. So in order to kind of open the door and leave it open a little bit, this is why this agenda item is being proposed, so that it all hinges on the legislature. If, because of what they're doing, then we're kind of using that as a reason to open the door and say, well, we're not going to decide yet. We're going to wait a little bit longer before we decide if we're going to give a raise or not give a raise. Just know that for people that are not contracted employees, like the ones we were talking about earlier, the custodians, the bus drivers, those folks, you can adjust their pay at any time. But we in our school district, and traditionally in all school districts, we do it all at the same time for all the groups of employees. So just kind of to give you a little bit of background as to why that's in there. Sure.
Thank you. I'm extremely glad that this is an item that we can vote on tonight, because I am committed to finding some way to get our staff a raise, and as quickly as we know that we possibly can.
We'll proceed to vote. Motion carries 7-0. And we are adjourned at, what?
There's one more.
Oh, I wanted to skip it. No, I'm kidding. I didn't want to skip it. I'm joking. Okay, sorry. D, consider and take possible action regarding approving amendments to the budget for the 2017 fiscal year. Do I have a motion?
Motion.
Motion, Mr. Macias, second, Ms. Canoyer. Discussion.
Doctor, can I speak?
If we don't have any discussion, we'll proceed to vote. Motion carries 7-0, and now we're adjourning at 8:15.